Welcome everyone, this is Yvonne Davis, and I am doing another video on when will Donald Trump leave the White House. So I mentioned that I was going to do another video in a three-part series, which I'm still going to do, but that's going to focus on the chart of the United States of America, and this is focusing on Donald Trump. And I have four charts to show you, and I think you'll find it very interesting, so I hope you'll enjoy this. All right. Let me go ahead and pull up the first chart. Okay, so the first thing I want you to see, which I showed you before, but I need to start here so that you can see the whole picture, is that the North Node is moving into Donald Trump's 12th house on election night. So that's very karmic, and that will take a year and a half to pass through the 12th house. So first of all, I want to explain what the North Node is and then what the 12th house is. The North Node is a karmic point. It's very karmic, and it indicates the direction of our evolution. And it moves backward around the zodiac. So on election morning, it's still in Leo, which is Donald Trump's first house, because he has an ascendant in Leo. So I want to clarify that, because sometimes people will say, wait a minute, he's Gemini. He has a sun in Gemini, but his ascendant is in Leo. So that's why it's his first house, okay? So it starts out in his first house on the morning of the election, and by the evening of the election, it has moved into his 12th house of endings and losses and dissolution. And I want you to really pay attention to that word dissolution, because I mention it in another one of my videos. The 12th house is ruled by Neptune, and Neptune is the planet of dissolution. So what happens in the 12th house, which is ruled by Neptune, is that it's a very spiritual house, and it forces us to let go of things, to release things, to dissolve things. It's the house of endings, dissolution, losses, surrendering, because it's really pushing us to move in the direction of our evolution. Especially with the North Node here, that's what's happening. He has to release all of the things that are standing in his way of moving in the direction of his evolution. And so from my perspective, what that means is anything that contributes to his narcissism, his pathological lying, and his mistreatment of women. He will have to face the consequences of those personality traits and those behaviors. And that's what will happen with the North Node in his 12th house. So that's very karmic. As I said, it's getting him ready to go around the chart again. And so that journey starts with a year and a half of the North Node in the 12th house. And again, that's endings, losses, dissolution. It's all about releasing things that no longer serve us. And my own personal prediction and interpretation is that relates to his pathological lying, his narcissism, and his mistreatment of women. Okay, so that's going to be a journey that takes a year and a half. Now let's take a couple, look at a couple other things here. I mentioned that women will play an important role in the election night, and that there will be a revolution, a turnover of some kind that will shake people up. I'm not being specific about what that will look like, because Uranus is the planet of unpredictability, but it will definitely be shocking and surprising and turn things upside down. Here we see Jupiter and Juno opposite each other. This is an indicator often of abuse toward women. And so Jupiter represents Donald Trump as president in the White House, and the 4th house is the indicator of home, foundations, real estate, And so that also represents the White House. So that's Jupiter. Donald Trump is president in the White House, and it's in the 29th degree, which is also an indicator of endings. And then the, let's see, the other one that was interesting was this one. Mars on election day is opposite his Mars. So this is the house of other people. This is the house of self. This is the house of other people. And it also represents all kinds of other people and relationships, including open enemies. And this is a very antagonistic alignment when you have Mars opposite your Mars. So his Mars in his first house is self, and Mars opposite. So this is definitely antagonistic. This is people rebelling, people who are unhappy with the job that he's been doing, okay? And let's see, one more thing I'm going to show you some more of is Saturn here moving into a square to his Neptune. So keep those things in mind as we look through the other three charts. The next chart I'm going to do is what happened the last time the North Node moved into his 12th house, which is approximately 18 and a half years ago. So I'm going to show you that chart. So because I had mentioned that before, and some people started doing research on what was going on in his life 18 and a half years ago. And so I want to show you some of the differences in the charts. Okay, so let me go ahead and switch over to that chart. Okay, so this was for April 9th, 2000, around midnight. That is when the North Node moved into his 12th house the last time. So any of you who enjoy doing that kind of research, that's what I'd suggest is look at what was happening in his life starting on April 9th, 2000 and moving ahead a year and a half, because that's how long it takes the North Node to move through the 12th house. So that'll give you some ideas of what was happening the last time the North Node moved through his house. And so you would want to look for things like endings, losses, things like that. And the difference, though, the major difference that I see here has to do with these planets here in his 10th house, because having Saturn and Jupiter in your 10th house is highly favorable. He also had Mars there when the North Node moved in. Mars is usually only spends about 2 months in a sign, unless it's going retrograde, then it stays there longer. And I didn't check to see if this was a year that Mars went retrograde in that house. But because of the fact that these planets are in the 10th house, particularly Saturn and Jupiter, means that he would have actually had a very successful time while those planets were there in business. So even though he may have had losses in business or finance or his personal life, he still had some extremely beneficial planets there to help counteract that. So I want to point that out because it's not going to be identical. What happened the last time in starting April 9th, 2000 and moving ahead a year and a half is not going to be identical to what's going to happen this time, okay? Because these planets will not be in his 10th house this time, okay? That's very significant. So I'm going to go back and show you that again, just because I think it's important to, well, I wanted to show you what other planet's going to be there. Hopefully it won't be too hard to find that chart. Here it is. Okay. So let's look at that again. Okay, so this is the same with the North Node going into his 12th house for a year and a half. Now this wouldn't matter as much, I don't think, if it weren't for the fact that he's president of the United States and the fact that it's happening on election day. That makes this much more dramatic indicator of what's coming. And same with this. that it wouldn't have as much meaning except for the fact that it's happening on election night. And it's also happening the moment that the North Node moves into the house. But this is the one I really want you to look at, because this is the major difference. Instead of having Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter all moving direct through his 10th house of career, he's got Juno there right over his midheaven, and that's the indicator of his misogyny and his abuse of women. So that's really interesting. And then the second one has to do with Uranus. Right now, Uranus, at least as far as election night is concerned, Uranus will end up in his 9th house, Aries. The 9th house rules anything to do with the law, okay? And so we know that Mueller is going to be presenting his report to Rod Rosenstein after the election. So I think that it will be quite shocking when Uranus, the planet of shockwaves, earthquakes, revolution, unpredictability, chaos, is in his 9th house of legal affairs. That's going to come back to haunt him. So, so we'll see what that looks like when that happens. And then Uranus will turn direct and it will move back into his 10th house. So that's really the key difference, is that the last time he had the North Node in the 12th house, he also had Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars direct in the 10th house, which was very favorable. This time instead, he's got Juno over his midheaven, indicating misogyny and abuse of women, and he will have Uranus moving through the 10th house, the planet of shock, surprises, chaos, unpredictability. But I think that what the major impact that Uranus is going to have in that house is that it's going to make him want to be free. And this is important because these planets, as the North Node moves through his 12th house, and especially as it makes connections to these planets in the 12th house, or anything over here in the 6th house of work, this is going to create a squeeze, and the squeeze is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. So I'm going to do some videos on that after the election. I'm going to start to show you the charts for 2019 and 2020, where it just gets more and more intense. The squeeze on him, the pressure on him just gets more and more intense over those 2 years. And I think that the impact of that, along with Uranus moving through his 10th house, is that he will just desperately want to be free of it. So I'm going to make a bold prediction today, and I'm going to say that Donald Trump will not be running for president in the 2020 elections. And the reason why I'm saying that, I think the choice will more likely be voluntary. He will choose not to run for re-election again, and that's going to have a lot to do with this pressure on him. I am not going to make a prediction yet about whether that will be voluntary or involuntary. I'm just going to say that I really don't think he'll be running for election next year, primarily because of all this pressure on him and because of the fact that he will desperately want to be free. He just simply won't want to go through it again. He'll just say, this isn't worth it, you know, this isn't what I signed up for. Because I think all he ever really wanted was to be rich and famous and powerful. He didn't really want to be president of the United States. He wanted the fame. He wanted the power. And maybe he thought also he could better himself financially, which he probably has. And those are the things that he really wanted. If being president of the United States didn't come with those things, he wouldn't have wanted it. He didn't actually want to do the job. So, and actually a lot of times he doesn't do the job. People have reported on that he actually doesn't really do the job. He's just full of hot air. So, but somehow he obviously does make things happen one way or another. But is it serving him and his narcissistic personality, or is it serving the country? And I think that's the big question that will be brought to the fore in 2019 and 2020 with the pressure building in these two houses. So this is the house of endings and losses, where he's having this karmic movement. And this is the 6th house of work. And it's Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node that will play the biggest role in these houses. So that's where the tightening will occur. And he, as this moves through here, he'll just desperately want to be free. So he'll do anything he can, especially once we get to 2020 and it gets so extreme he can hardly stand it. All he'll want is to just be free. So I don't think he'll run for election again. Alrighty, so I think that's everything I wanted to say about this chart. I'm going to bring up the chart of the new moon, which, so this again is election night, November 6th, when the North Node moves into his 12th house. And I'm going to next show you the new moon, which is on November 7th. And I want you to pay particular attention to Saturn, okay? Because Saturn is moving into a square to his Neptune. And that's the most important thing that's going to just really, like, that's the first thing that's going to kick it off. So first I'm going to show the new moon, and then Saturn when it's in exact square to his Neptune. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring up that new moon chart. Okay, so the day after the elections, November 7th, 2018, we have a new moon. So it's like we're waking up to a whole new reality. And so is Donald Trump. So the North Node has moved into his 12th house of endings and losses. And we have the new moon in the 4th house of home and foundations and real estate. So for him, that indicates the White House. We have Jupiter here, which indicates Donald Trump. And that is the last degree of this sign. So that also indicates an ending for him. We still have Venus and Ceres here, conjunct the midheaven, opposite Uranus. Uranus is flipping things upside down in a very unpredictable and chaotic way. So we'll have to see how that all turns out. And then again, Juno up here on his midheaven, making it public the way that his misogyny and the way he mistreats women, opposite Jupiter down here. Okay, so again, I wanted you to look at this. Here again, we have Mars opposite his Mars. That's a very antagonistic alignment. And then Saturn is what I want you to look at here. So I'm going to bring this up so we can really take a look at Saturn. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so what we see here is Saturn on the ascendant. And as I've said in some of my other chart readings, this point here in the chart is actually the most important part. When you see a planet on the ascendant, that's the most important point in the 360-degree chart. So what does it mean when you see Saturn on the ascendant? And that's where we see it in Washington, D.C., when we have this new moon and all these other things coming about. Saturn on the ascendant has a very similar effect as the North Node moving into the 12th house. Saturn is all about taking things away, removing things. It contracts, it deletes. I sort of think about it as the great cosmic eraser. It's just like, and I was saying that before, that there are actually 3 things. I'll talk more about this in part 3 of my 3-part series, but this is one of the factors. So one of them is the North Node moving into a new sign, and for Donald Trump, that's his 12th house of endings. The other has to do with Neptune, ruler of the 12th house, which when you see it on the ascendant, that means dissolution, okay? And now we have Saturn on the ascendant when we have this new moon. So this is again telling us this is three indicators of endings, losses, dissolution, taking things away, removing things, deleting things. I mean, I want to tell you a quick story about when I had Saturn on my ascendant in it was in my solar return chart. And that year, especially like within a month from my birthday, it just started ripping things out of my life left and right, left and right, left and right, left and right. Relationships, I think I must have ended at least 7 relationships, important relationships that year, because they were dysfunctional, and I was done with it. I was done with it. And they either left voluntarily, like they just didn't fit in my life anymore, or I made some effort. Mostly I didn't have to tell anyone to leave. It was just like, it just didn't fit in my life anymore. And those relationships were gone. So by the end of that year, 7 important relationships were gone, and they have never come back. And I left a place, actually, at the beginning of that year, within a month of my birthday, I left a place that I was living, which I'd been trying to get out of for a while because I didn't think it was a very healthy living situation, and moved in with a boyfriend. And then that relationship ended, and I moved out of there. Then I moved in with another person, and that relationship ended, and I moved out of there. It sounds like I'm an awful person, but actually it was just, I just could not live in toxic, dysfunctional relationships anymore. And that was what Saturn was doing for me, was it was taking all of that stuff out. Probably may have removed some jobs as well. I don't remember all the details. I just remember like left and right things being ripped out of my life and just thrown out. Like, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. I'm done with this. And so it ended up being, although it was a very challenging year, it ended up being a good foundation for me to start the next year of my life, where I was much, much more successful, because I didn't have all that dysfunction cluttering my life up anymore. So, so that's what Saturn does. It takes things out for a reason. You know, it's not just random. It's taking things out for a reason. It's like cleaning out your basement, sort of like, okay? That's what Saturn does. And I'll also tell you another quick story where I had seen a friend who had the same alignment. She had Saturn on her ascendant in her solar return chart, and she had Uranus in her 7th house of others, which also rules marriage. And I told her she was going to get a divorce, and she didn't believe me. But by the end of that year, she was divorced. And so that's another example of how Saturn rips things out of our lives. And often it's not to be mean, it's not to make our lives miserable, it's because those things need to go in order for us to move in the direction of our evolution. That's why it has a very similar effect as the North Node in the 12th house. So, so I think it will be removing things, both for the nation and for Donald Trump. It's cleaning out the trash. It's like the real draining of the swamp. Okay, so so we'll see what this is, the new moon, the morning after the election. So this is going to be really fascinating to watch happen. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring that back up to show you how that looks on Donald Trump's chart again. All righty. So here we go. We have, this is that Saturn I was showing you on the ascendant, right at that new moon, the very next day, new moon in the 4th house, which would be, in this case, the White House. And so I've showed you all of these alignments around here. This is the last one I'm going to focus on, which once again, Saturn here on the ascendant at the new moon, the day after the elections, is squaring his Neptune. So now I'm going to show you the chart where we'll see the exact square to Neptune. What does that look like? All right, let's pull up Donald Trump's chart. Let's put Saturn square around it. and see what we get. Look at that. Ooh, we still have Mars opposite his Mars. We still have this incredibly antagonistic alignment here with Mars in his seventh house of others, including open enemies, opposite his Mars. And we still have Venus and Ceres here at the midheaven. We still have Uranus up here turning things upside down, bringing chaos. We still have Juno up here on his midheaven, showing publicly how misogynistic and abusive he is toward women. And this in the 12th house, that'll take a year and a half to fully play out. And over here we have the moon conjunct Saturn on the ascendant, making an exact square to his Neptune. As I've mentioned before, Neptune in his natal chart in his third house of communication is why he lies so much, because the shadow side of Neptune is deceit and deception. And I've mentioned that Mercury, ruler of the third house in his 12th house, also has the same impact, because Neptune is the ruler of 12th house in the third house, and Mercury is the ruler of the third house in the 12th house. So he has this double whammy that leads to his pathological lying. And I think that's what's going to come to the fore in this whole thing that's going to play out in these two houses, the 12th house of endings and the 6th house of work. So here we go. Look at that right there, making an exact square to his Neptune. Okay, that is on November 11th, 10:25 a.m., Washington, D.C. Keep your eyes open for that. We're going to see something really amazing coming down. I just think it's going to be incredible. I'm making this video on October 21st. So we have about 2 weeks left until the election, and then everything we're going to literally wake up to a whole new reality. It's going to be amazing. So hold on to your hats. Okay, here we go. Alrighty, so I'll bring that video to a close. I hope you enjoyed that. And like I said, I will do a part 3 video, which will have completely different information, because I'm going to be looking at the chart of the United States of America and talking about what does the future hold for our country. And after the elections, I will do more videos for 2019 and 2020, so you can start to see how things are going to play out. Alrighty, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.